And thanks also to Ralph and to Greshma. Huge admiration for what you do. And also thank you, Eda, for organizing this opportunity to reflect on something that brings us all together and bonds us. And I'm not, I presume I speak for the others, but it gets me out of bed in the morning. This kind of thing, I think it really is what makes community service worth living. And also apologies, I don't have a presentation today as such. I just thought I'd share my experiences over the years working with and alongside EDA and RFP. At least in some sense, this may leave some more time for questions, which I'm eager to get into in the end. And I'm sure we've got a wealth of experience in this room. So I thought I'd look at this from two perspectives. One, Eda asked me to talk about my, I guess, individual experiences with interfaith work, so me as an individual, and then also institutionally with some of the organizations that I belong to, and how we deal with and handle this idea of interfaith. I've always thought, in some sense, it's a bit of an unfortunate word. Speaking as a humanist, I've never belonged to a religion. My parents are atheist. My grandparents are also atheists. I was born in India. I always thought that in that sense, interfaith, people always ask, are you of faith? That always struck me as an interesting word. Obviously, humanists are part of that. We celebrate and work with people of all faith and belief backgrounds. Actually, one of the first interfaith groups that I joined was here in West London in Hounslow. It was called Hounslow Friends of Faith. And whenever I turn up to the meetings, and then I'd say, "Oh, I'm an atheist. I'm a humanist," they'd always say, "Well, what are you doing at a Friends of Faith meeting?" So then I developed an answer back to that, a retort, which was, "Well, yeah, it's Hounslow Friends of Faith. You're the faith, and we're the friends. So that's why I'm here." But I get whether you call it interfaith or whether you call it intergroup dialogue. I guess the idea is that we all have faith in something. I have faith in the human spirit, and also I have faith in interfaith, and that's a bit of what I'd like to talk about today. So on the individual level, I guess for the past 5 years or so, it sped up during the pandemic because obviously we had more time on our hands, we were isolated. That kickstarted it, but there was some of it before then. Weekly study classes with people of other faith and belief backgrounds, based on things that we share. And I think that's what interfaith gets at and sort of digs up and makes visible is, despite us being from different backgrounds, from different spiritual, philosophical backgrounds and religious traditions, with different rituals, different dress, different foods and customs, even sex and gender traditions, so many different things that divide us. But actually there are things, very core things about our humanity that unites us. And in these study classes, which I've been doing now since the start of the pandemic and a bit before, we look at poetry, we look at ideas of spirituality, we study holy texts. So, for example, my typical week looks like on a Monday, I have a Baha'i interfaith study class. On Tuesday, we study the Gita. On a Wednesday, which is different, the Hindu text. On Wednesday, another Baha'i class. Thursday, we have a Quran class. It actually got a bit out of hand, as you can imagine. It's tough to keep on top of all of those, lots of WhatsApp groups and so on. But that's, for me, that I was able to just completely lose myself into that. And I've gained so much from it. I'm not saying that everyone needs to do this, but I just thought as an experiment, I can sort of report from my interfaith experience and experiment. These are the things that I've learned, that, for example, meditation, silent retreats, mental health awareness and mindfulness, self-improvement and emotional maturity. These are all things that no one faith or belief group has exclusive privilege to or access to or a commentary on. And whether you're of a religious faith, or a humanist or atheist, or even there's some people who are atheists and they don't even call themselves humanists because they think humanism is, again, another kind of a pseudo religion. And they're right in some ways and wrong in other ways, I would say. But regardless of these labels that divide us, moving beyond that, I found in these things that there should be, as a human, we have a wonderful opportunity, and also in some sense a right, to comment on all of these things that come down to us as a tradition, as an inheritance of our civilization, like the Quran, like the Bhagavad Gita, like the Upanishads, the Dhammapada. These are all and can be studied in a respectful way, of course, respecting the the traditions of many hundreds and thousands of years of other people commenting on and giving and putting their heart and soul into interpreting these texts. But also each individual person brings something new to it. And having that sort of idea of my Baha'i friends talk about this a lot. And actually, we were mentioning this in an interfaith event we had last week that Ed also organized. This idea of progressive revelation, or the progressive idea, is that interfaith or humanism or any religion in the Baha'i concept is not static. It's never, it's always dynamic. It's always being renewed. It's always being given new inputs by everyone who comes across it. So it's never too late, and it's never, you can never study the Quran too many times, can never study the Bible too many times, can never look at the life of the Buddha, of Muhammad, of Jesus too many times, because they all have things to teach us. And just by dint of the fact that billions of people give them such importance, me as a humanist, even if I don't believe every aspect of the theology and the doctrine that's behind these things, I'm interested in them on a human level. So for me, that's as an individual, that's obviously I've had lovely collaborators. Not everyone is able to open and be open-minded about discussing their religion with someone who doesn't belong to their religion. You have to find the right partners and the people to work with. And I'll talk about that a bit later as well. But given that, and I'm sure that a lot of them I found through EDA, through RFP, and through other networks here as well. But finding the right partners and finding the right allies in this has benefited me on an individual level with these study classes, with these spirituality and meditation classes that we've all managed to organize with the help of technology and WhatsApp and so on. So that for me has been a personal benefit of interfaith. Then maybe to say a bit about institutional benefits and challenges also. So I put here next to my name, National Multifaith Youth Centre. That's a charity that me and a few other young interfaith colleagues founded. They got accepted as by the Charity Commission last year because we wanted to address the problem of why is there no youth in interfaith? I mean, interfaith, we go to interfaith events over these past 5 years. Me from Humanists UK, the humanist group that I belong to and volunteer with, and Young Humanists UK and Hounslow Friends of Faith, which I mentioned earlier, we'd go to many interfaith events and we just find that there were just people who were exclusively almost of an older age group, and which made us think, okay, where is the youth? Where is the youth interest in this? And we realized that it's somewhere along the way interfaith at best was seen as something to sort of engage in to beef up your CV or for your university applications or something like that. But it wasn't actually the beating heart of a community of or even a city like London, with so many, the scope for interfaith in London, just to give one example, as I'm based here, is so massive, but it was always a surface level thing. Maybe it was a politician who'd used it for their branding, a marketing label, or a jargon that third sector people would use in the charity sector and NGO sector, but it wasn't actually getting at someone who lives in a certain community, follows a certain tradition. How is that person's life in their neighborhood improved by having an interfaith consciousness rather than just going to their mosque or going to their temple and having blinders on? And so one example of that, I mean, Ralph's talked about it amazingly, the refugee support work, and that's another example that I can give, as well as the National Multifaith Youth Centre, which we started. I also belong to Refugees Welcome Hounslow, which is one of many refugees welcome groups that are all over the country, but we started one where I live in Hounslow. And we also work with people in hotels and also people in private accommodation that have already been granted refugee status. And I'm the only humanist amongst the volunteers. Everyone else is from different faiths and backgrounds. So that was also another example of how an interfaith consciousness can actually make a real difference in someone's life, rather than just being limited to and Greshma's the Eco Peace Cafe as well. That goes back to what I was saying about sharing the need for us to connect on a spiritual level, to explore mindfulness, to explore all of these human condition problems that affect all of us, equally in some way. And so I think these were what inspired me to get not only myself involved as a sort of a lone warrior, but also institutionally to try and bring along my humanist colleagues, my other activist colleagues, and say, whatever you're doing, try and find some intersectionality in that, try and bring an interfaith consciousness in it. And again, I was very inspired by what RFP were doing in saying, if it's a climate change issue, let's not only tackle it as I don't know, Sikhs or humanists or Hindus, each having parallel approaches. Let's try and see where we can unite. And this is something that I've tried to take to regional and international levels as well. So as well as National Multifaith Youth Centre, I also work with Humanists International, which is a global charity. And we had our interfaith as a key sort of theme of our annual assembly last year in Singapore. And Singapore and Malaysia especially are, I think, shining lights of how interfaith can work in countries and societies that have very, very strong religious traditions, but they gel well with each other and they have respect for each other's differences, but they unite in diversity. And I think the UK especially could learn a lot from that. And actually, I was in Singapore just after the UK riots that happened here. So it left, and then just with that on my mind, going to a conference that was particularly on interfaith and seeing how Singapore, which has its own history of very, very violent riots in decades past, solved that problem. At least, I mean, no problem is fully solved, but did a lot to address it. And now they've not had communal violence like that forever. But at one point, it seemed like it was inevitable and they didn't know how to stop it in decades past. And Singapore's quite a violent history between these communities, but they had some important lessons to teach us. So institutionally, that's also something that I try and take forward, because I think just like on the individual level, there's spirituality, there's mindfulness, there's poetry, there's art that can kind of cross the religious divide. On the institutional level, there can be things like human rights advocacy, trying to get towards a universal, well, we have the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, but reinterpret that. As we said before, I think nothing is static. Each generation has to reinterpret and give new value back into things like the Geneva Convention or things like the UN Universal Declaration of Human Rights. And those are in doing that advocacy. So Humanists International, for example, advocates at the UN level and the Human Rights Council, at the EU level, for freedom of thought, freedom of expression issues, which are humanist values, but they're also other, on a secular basis, they're values that other religious groups also hold, and Christian groups, for example, and they also come and join us. And I think that's really powerful when, if it's the usual suspects, oh, okay, that's a humanist issue. Here comes the humanist to talk about the humanist issue. Oh, that's an Islamic issue. Here comes the Islamic State to talk about that. It just sort of goes over people's heads and it becomes too predictable. But if suddenly a humanist speaks up for what's usually considered a quote unquote Islamic stereotypical rights issue, then suddenly people take notice. Or if a Hindu organization representative or a Buddhist organization representative speaks up for a humanist cause, or one that's seen to be a humanist cause, then suddenly we start changing the game, both in how the media can interpret these things, because the media often will not want to have an angle and a story, and they'll pothole it into a certain that fits a certain stereotype in a cookie cutter way. So we try and break down these barriers institutionally. So I think that kind of shared advocacy I found to be very powerful, and that all comes from seeing how interfaith can work at the very individual level. So hopefully I'll stop there. Hopefully that gives you a flavor of how both on the individual level and institutionally interfaith has been challenging, but also very rewarding for me. And hopefully that's prompted a lot of questions and comments, which I'd be happy to engage in. Thank you.